prepping. All right, meeting's being live streamed. I like what I'm seeing. I like what I'm hearing. We're getting our technology all squared up, and I think we are ready to roll. Matt was at Memorial Stadium on Saturday. Jevin was at Memorial Stadium on Saturday. I was at Memorial Stadium in Bloomington on Saturday, and all three of us were watching that game. And don't lie, you were at home as well. And you were saying, gosh darn it, this Indiana football team looks fresh. And they look interested. They look interesting. They look entertaining. They look like they've got a little attitude about them. Their defense was, forget touchdowns, they weren't allowing first downs. And Michael Penix and Stephen Carr and Peyton Hendershot were capitalizing on Cincinnati takeaways, giveaways. And then it all changed. One targeting call completely messed with the trajectory and the development of that game. We're going to offer our final thoughts on Indiana's defeat to number 8 Cincinnati and dive into a full-scale preview of Western Kentucky and so much more here on episode 218 of the Hoosier Sound, where we are the official podcast of Indiana HQ. I am joined by my normal podcast co-host, Matt Lukens. Matt, you were in the crowd on Saturday. Take me through what the atmosphere was like in the student section, in among the Hoosier faithful, and then dive into whatever you want to dive into as far as Indiana's loss to Cincinnati last weekend.
Yeah, I have plenty of mixed feelings about this game, but the one thing I don't have a mixed feeling about was the turnout on Saturday. I thought it was really good for Cincinnati. Like, of course, Ohio State turns out almost every year. There's a good turnout for an Ohio State game. That's mostly because Ohio State fans travel. But no, since there was a strong contingent of Cincinnati fans, but mostly was IU fans, and everybody was super ready for the game. The students showed up, which was fantastic, and that was really fun to be there. I actually sat with the students with my little brother, so that was an interesting time to say the least. I do think
are you gonna get in trouble for that? Can we or is it past the statute of limitations that you stuck in?
It's fine. It's fine.
It's fine.
I had a ticket, so
okay.
I was allowed to be there. But yeah, I thought it was good. Now the energy level kind of dwindled, I would say, as far as a fan perspective, because the game was so damn hot. It was super hot outside and not a cloud in the sky, and everybody had been tailgating since like 8 a.m. So I had plenty of times where I had to go get security to get somebody out of the student section because they passed out, which is not fun. But people stayed after halftime, which was great, and the game was a good game. It's what it was. It was a good, close game, almost into the end of the fourth quarter. Now, sadly, IU blew the game, because if you look back at this game, the only people IU can blame for losing this game is themselves, and maybe the targeting rule, which is what I would like to dive into first, because when you look back on this game, that is the pivotal turning point of the game. Now, if you remember, we were up 14-0, I believe, at the time. Peyton Hendershot, our linebacker extraordinaire,
Micah McFadden.
Sorry, excuse me, I just woke up from a nap. Micah McFadden comes in on a third down play. Now, I couldn't see this at the time because Memorial Stadium's replays are the worst.
And they probably didn't want to, self-inflict any sort of punishment, right? The scoreboard operators probably like, I don't know what they're looking at. What are they going to pay attention to? Yeah, what's going on here? Yeah.
But anyways, long story short is Desmond Ridder on a throw gets hit up high by Micah. Now, Micah wouldn't have hit him where he did and how he did if he had been pushed from behind. Yeah. Still is targeting, but I think this is when this is a clip that will be brought up in the summer, as there's been multiple instances of this year already happening, where somebody's been ejected for targeting when on a play in which they had no control over committing the foul.
Yep.
Like, there's intent behind the foul. I get getting the 15-yard penalty or whatever it is for targeting. I get that being enforced because of the unfortunate circumstance of you committing the foul, but the intent behind it was he could not control himself, so therefore there was no intent to commit the foul.
Right. Targeting by nature, the connotation is that, anytime you target anything, it has purpose behind it, intent behind it.
Exactly. He's not leading with the crown of his helmet. He was not aiming up high on Desmond Ridder. So unfortunately, we lost our best player, but that's not even the worst part of that. And that was that we were up 14-0 at the time. And that was a third down play that was an incompletion. And at the time, I thought they were reviewing to see if it was a fumble.
Me too.
Because the way in which Ridder threw the ball looked like he might have lost control of it before he had forward motion. Which, again, if that had been the case, Cincinnati recovered the ball at the end of the play because all the IU players thought it was an incomplete pass. So that would have been unfortunate if that had been called. But again, the refs find a way to screw IU because really, I don't think that should have been called under the jurisdiction of the rule. And it's just, we lost our best player for the rest of the game. The good news is he'll be back for the Western Kentucky game this weekend. But we lost our best player on the defense for the rest of the game, and that clearly had a difference because they marched right down the field and scored. And they would have had to punt where they were at. They were not going to go for it because I believe they're inside their own 30.
Yeah, it was like, exactly.
It was around the 30, 34-yard line. They're not going to go for it. IU punts, gets the ball back with, I believe, 2 or 3 minutes left in the half, and then they get the ball to start the next half. Like, that game is over. That game is over. If IU even goes in 14-0, gets the ball back to start the second half, that game is so hard for Cincinnati to come back.
Yep.
But they go and score. IU gets the ball back. Can't really do all too much with it. I believe Cincinnati then scores again before the half, or they score shortly. And then it goes all downhill from there. Basically, the offense did not look the same in the second half. They couldn't run the ball. It's just the play that changed the entire momentum of the game was that targeting call. I know the student section never recovered from it because the energy, everybody, it sucked the entire energy out of the student section when that happened. Nobody knew what was going on, which on one hand is completely down to the scoreboard operator at IU, by the way. Like, they have to get better at that because nobody in the crowd had any idea that this was even possibly going on.
And that's something we see normally around college football Saturdays. When a targeting play is being reviewed, you hear that the play is being reviewed for targeting. And that never came about, and that communication never took place on Saturday. And it all comes down to this, right? Like this is a problem wherein the NCAA does not have a college football commissioner. Right. There is so much lack of leadership as far as the things you have to do in order to draw in an audience, in order to keep the fans engaged, in order to make sure the product on the field is the best available. The two problems you mentioned are right there. Confusion as far as the targeting rule, and confusion as far as in-stadium announcements are concerned by the officials. They announce everything. They announce when someone calls a timeout. They announce when someone commits a penalty. They announce every review in the book, it seems like. But then when there's a big review like this taking place over the course of the game, it's complete silence and everyone's left in limbo. First of all, want to thank everyone for joining us here on episode 218 of the Hoosier Sound. If you want to talk about the Micah McFadden targeting call, if you want to talk about whatever else happened in the Cincinnati game, drop your questions, drop your comments in the live chat. Of course, you can always comment to this episode on our YouTube live stream. You can send us messages on Twitter and Facebook. Last Saturday, Indiana dropped a tough one to Cincinnati. 38-24 was the final score. That targeting play changed the entire complexion of the game. And just to make sure we have all our I's dotted and our T's crossed as far as that sequence at the end of the first half, instead of Cincinnati punting, Micah McFadden's thrown out of the game. Cincinnati scores a touchdown to make it 14-7. And then on the ensuing drive, Michael Penix Jr. threw his worst of the 3 interceptions as far as I'm concerned. One where he was drifting through to his right, threw awkwardly over the middle of the field to apparently Peyton Hender's shot, but really it was like 3 different Cincinnati players that could have picked it off. Arquan Bush intercepted it at midfield. Cincinnati came down, scored a field goal just like that. It was 14-10 at halftime instead of 14-0, 21-7, something like that. And of course, the air was let out of the building a little bit as far as the crowd and Memorial Stadium atmosphere was concerned, as all of a sudden Indiana was right in a tough one. I was expecting Tom Allen to deflect attention, blame, comments as far as that particular play was concerned. And he didn't. No. He didn't. He said, look, on Saturday post-game, I was on the press conference. Allen didn't say, well, we've got to figure out how to overcome stuff like that happening in the game. Football is a physical game. Targeting call is part of the game. He didn't say anything. He said, no, change the entire game. And then he had a chance to pull his comments back on Monday morning in his weekly recap of the previous game, preview of the opponent press conference with the media. Still didn't. He said, still think, based on what I looked at, change the complexion of the game. And when Joel Klatt had a sort of a notorious rant about targeting back in week 1, the Fox primary analyst about targeting, and Klatt's normally sort of right down the middle, but he really jumped on the NCAA for having this really shaky, finicky, sensitive targeting rule. And he said it's bad for the game. And I understand player safety, but you're taking out the best players on both sides, on the defensive side of the ball, and there's nothing they can do about it. The rules got to be changed. I initially thought he was overreacting, not now. As I've watched the games over week 1 to finish that up into week 2, and then of course week 3 last weekend, they need to do something in the middle of the season, perhaps as early as this coming Monday or Tuesday. Change the rule. It's not going to change the players' actions. I think that's the point you were making earlier, Matt. There's nothing they're doing different. There's nothing they can do differently about the actions of what they're doing on the field. Hit them with the 15-yard penalty and only use the ejection as far as flagrant targeting cases are concerned. Does that make sense to you? I don't think that's overly complicated. And do you feel like there are going to be problems implementing that in the middle of the season?
No, I really don't. I think that would obviously have been called correctly on Saturday if the rule had been changed to a foul of purpose. If there was
it's what they have in like basketball, right? The flagrant 1 and the flagrant 2.
Exactly. You can tell if somebody means to hit somebody in a certain way that is targeting when they literally wind up, lower their head, or they look at the person and aim their head. Now, if they are getting pushed, they trip, they don't see the person, right? Clearly they're out of view. Like, there are certain things that come into play where they just right place, wrong time on a football field, right?
Yeah.
McFadden made a fantastic football play to get in the position that he was at, to get pressure on Ritter.
Yeah. And McFadden knew. McFadden knew. I'm not, I got pressure on him. I'm not in a position to get the sack. Ritter threw the football. McFadden gets pushed and bang, helmet to helmet contact. McFadden, you're out of the game.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
Absolutely ridiculous.
It's an absurd rule. They should change it. They will not change it in the midseason because that would be the smart thing to do.
Yeah, exactly.
Add a check to see, did he mean it? Did he not mean it? Was it on? Because I will have to admit, when talking about the targeting rule, it has helped tremendously. With player safety. It really has forced defenses to change the way in which they tackle. Like the amount of times I'm seeing a wide receiver completely cleared out for running over the middle is like 1 in like 100 games now. It's very rare that you see somebody actually just have like a completely terrible hit. I remember watching NFL games, and this was like a weekly thing like 5 or 6 years ago, where somebody is just taking a crossing pattern across the middle of the field and gets their head completely taken off. This is not something that happens anymore because that would be clearly called targeting, which is great because, again, takes a lot of the CTE element out of it. You're not causing people concussions. It's not dangerous. It's dangerous to both the defensive and the offensive player when they do that. So that's great. It has worked in that facet, but in the other facet, it has completely ruined certain defensive teams and schemes because it's hard to play around when you have to like kind of almost plan on like, well, what if something goes wrong this game and we lose him to targeting, right? He doesn't get injured. He doesn't get suspended by team rules.
Nope.
It's nothing like
it's just a random minefield, right? Yes. Like there's nothing defensive players can do.
Yeah. They can't escape
nothing.
It. Yeah.
There's nothing they can do. Football is inherently a contact sport. And some of the contact is going to involve pushing and shoving people who are wearing helmets into other people who are wearing helmets. Like, I know that's an overly elementary explanation, but that's just the way it is. Stop throwing important players, any players, but especially important players, out of games for things that they cannot control. That's all it comes down to. There are obviously a lot of other things that happened during the game that we need to get to. Indiana lost to Cincinnati 38-24 at Memorial Stadium in Bloomington on Saturday. Indiana's unranked for the first time since they were unranked after losing to Iowa, but they didn't even receive a vote for the first time since the middle of the 2019 football season. Some other interesting numbers as far as teams who are currently ranked in the AP poll: Iowa's number 5, Cincinnati's number 8, Indiana's opponent on October 2nd, Penn State, they're number 6, Ohio State is number 10. Ole Miss, Indiana's bowl opponent from last season, that going into that game felt like a pretty overwhelming mismatch in favor of Indiana. Ole Miss is 13th, and Michigan State entered the poll for the first time this past week. They're in at number 20. Matt, let's talk about Michael Penix Jr. I know he's the player that everyone has underlined, they circled, they bolded, they're paying attention to on a repeated basis. Michael Penix has really struggled as far as to this point. We're at the quarter pole of the season. Against Cincinnati, he was 17 of 40 for 224 yards. He threw 2 touchdowns, but he also threw 3 rough interceptions. Talk to me about Michael Penix Jr. What are you seeing? Is this recoverable? Is that an exaggeration? Should Indiana play Jack Tuttle more and more as the season goes on? Help answer some of those questions for me.
Jack Tuttle is not the answer for this.
I agree.
Man. And if you think he is, you're
delusional. That's what you are.
I don't know if you're delusional. He's not even the same breed as Penix.
No,
right? Like
exactly.
It would be like your starting pitcher in baseball is missing a lot, so you bench him and you bring in one of your minor leaguers to take his starts. Like you're not going
to start the next game, right?
It's like if Marcus Stroman for the Mets is throwing high up and close to the batter fastballs and is hitting a bunch of batters, so they take him out and they replace him with me.
or even whatever, right? Like a double A, triple A pitcher, end of the roster pitcher to start the next game for him. It's one thing to maybe pull Stroman and put someone else in the game to finish that game, but to take the next start. I really like that analogy.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. Penix has been the starter since he basically walked on campus. Okay, that's not going to change. And if Ramsey couldn't beat him, right, and saw what he did with Western, I don't know what makes you think that Tuttle's going to beat him based off of what you saw last year. Remember, we probably win that bowl game if we have a competent quarterback. And you look where Ole Miss is now, and where
top 15 team in the country.
Yeah, exactly. We beat that team. That defense was good enough to, or I guess Ole Miss defense was bad enough that we should have beat them. So Penix is the starter. So if you think Tuttles should be in there, you're kind of kidding yourself. And even if you're in IU media, by the way, and you're bringing up like, why aren't we seeing Tuttle? Like, stop kidding yourself.
Clickbait. It's clickbait.
Yeah, please.
Like, you know, as far as media is concerned, and I consider myself part of IU football media, like you have an inherent obligation to at least report things realistically, right?
Yeah.
Fairly. Like we're not, you know, it depends, you know, if you're a part of an opinion-based podcast or whatever, where, you know, the credential process isn't there and the press conference process isn't there and the things like that, then you can get a little crazy with Tuttle versus Penix or whatever. But Tom Allen's not starting Jack Tuttle.
No.
That's it. Like, Hoosier fans, you guys can want whatever you want. Jack Tuttle isn't starting. Jack Tuttle might come in during a game like he did against Iowa.
Yeah.
Because Michael Penix was struggling, or like he did against Idaho because Indiana had jumped out to such a big lead. Jack Tuttle might find his way into games. He might take a series. He might step in or at the end of a half, at the end of a game. I don't know. Jack Tuttle's not starting. That's it. Michael Penix Jr. is QB1. And I'm just going to throw this out there. Not only is he starting, Michael Penix Jr. has also faced arguably the two best non-SEC secondaries in the country through 3 games this year. Yeah, let's take Alabama and Florida and Georgia out of it. Okay, I'm going to keep that a whole separate conversation. Texas A&M. Iowa and Cincinnati, as far as non-SEC teams, are not joking. 2 of the 3 or 4 best secondaries in the entire country outside of the SEC. Iowa, NFL draft pick Riley Moss, NFL draft pick Matt Hankins, Cincinnati first round draft pick Ahmad Gardner on one side of the field, and NFL draft pick Kobe Bryant on the other side of the field. These defensive backs that Michael Penix has gone up against so far are ruthless. They are brutal. And so I'm not going to sit here and say Michael Penix needs to be taken out. No, Michael Penix has been a D- quarterback through 3 games. He has. Okay. The numbers speak for themselves. 48% completions, 448 passing yards, 4 touchdowns, 6 picks. That's inexcusable. But let's consider all these factors here before saying that Jack Tuttle needs to start. The ball comes out of Penix's arm differently. I saw some really good things out of Penix in the second half that I think can carry forward. Now, if he goes into this game on Saturday and has 1 touchdown and 3 picks and is making a lot of stupid decisions, we can see what Tom Allen says after that. But until then, Michael Penix is your QB1. There is no discussion about it.
There's no discussion. I'd also like to point out that he is playing with a stacked deck against him, especially in that Cincinnati game. One, he has his top wide receiver in Freifogel, who's just dropping balls left and right. I mean, there was at least 3 catchable balls that would have been game changers that Freifogel had. And he just flat out dropped them in that game. He has an offensive line that might as well not even be there. They might as well be playing like the 2-hand touch rules where they give Penix 3 seconds to throw the ball, then the entire
right.
defense
1,000. Yeah, 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi.
And then all of a sudden they're running at him. And then 3, this is something I mentioned before the season, and Penix's footwork in the pocket is abysmal. That's one of the things when you look at as a person who knows anything about quarterbacking, he just doesn't really set himself, and he kind of like scampers around in there. And it's not like in a Russell Wilson-esque manner where it's like controlled chaos. It's in like a really bad Andy Dalton version. Yeah, sorry, Bears fans. But in like a like scared for his life and deer caught in the headlights kind of scampering, and it's not controlled. The backpedaling while throwing, falling down and throwing. Like he's watched 5 minutes too much of Patrick Mahomes highlight tape and has brought it upon himself to try to reincarnate Mahomes into his own game. But he has the arm talent to do that. It's just that Mahomes is a freak of nature who can actually just be like backpedaling and throw a 50-yard dime onto the forehead of a wide receiver in three, on a cover three defense
in his sleep,
in his sleep. So he's forcing things, but he's being forced to force things. And also the one last main thing I would like to, and this is about forcing things. One last main thing I'd like to bring up is that Nick Sheridan needs to do a much better job of playing of play calling.
Yeah.
Like it just comes down to the fact that in the first half, Penix looked great. Now, why did Penix look great? That's because Penix didn't have to make the huge plays on himself. He obviously looks uncomfortable behind this offensive line. So run the football, make sure that Penix can make easy throws. He started throwing picks when he started having to force things. And when he has to start forcing things, he doesn't have the offensive line to help him, give him time to make a play. His receivers aren't getting open. Obviously, the play calls aren't working. There's something that needs to be done. I like some of the play calls on Saturday, especially the ones where people were going in motion, where there's a wide receiver, you're getting Penix out on a roll. That's a great way to kind of prolong a play, get him outside of the pocket, make sure that he has time and space to throw the ball. When he has to sit back and kind of throw against what is a stacked defense because they know they can get pressure rushing 4 and 5, especially with the defenses and the secondaries that we've played. Like you said, Nithin, he's going to have a hard time. And so some of these play calls, I'm looking at it, 17 of 40. Okay, Freifogel drops about 3 passes. There's maybe another 2 drops. That's like 22 of 40. Like some of those throws are just, he's unable to make them because they're just not there.
Right.
They're just not there. And so the play calling needs to get better. You need to get somebody like Penix in a rhythm. That was done. And then it was completely thrown out of rhythm in the second half by the same play calls.
Gosh.
Like you have to mix it up. You have to keep your guy, your Mustang, your Porsche of a quarterback. You got to keep him in rhythm. You got to keep him comfortable.
Put him in positions to succeed, right?
Yes.
I thought the point you made right at the start about guys not helping Michael Penix Jr. out a little bit hit me like an uppercut to the chin. I mean, that one was that's a great point. Receivers, O-line, coaches. Michael Penix is not without his fair share of accountability for what has happened through 3 games, what has transpired through 3 games. But consider this, like you're talking about rhythm, right? I'm going to talk about predictability. Indiana had 14 drives, I believe, against Cincinnati on Saturday. Top 10 team, top 10 coaching staff, top 10 defense. The last 2 drives of the game were pretty much when Indiana was forced to throw the ball. Okay.
Yeah.
Last 2 drives. So out of the first 12 drives of the game, when it was a basically 50-50 toss-up kind of game, Indiana ran the ball on the first play of those drives 10 times. Cincinnati kicked off to Indiana, Cincinnati punted to Indiana, Cincinnati turned the ball over to Indiana, whatever. And then on the first 12 drives of the game, Indiana ran the ball 10 out of those 12 times. And guess what? Not a single one of those plays went for more than 6 yards. Yeah. Okay? Maybe the first drive of the game you run to get some momentum, to get some rhythm, to get your sea legs underneath you. Maybe the second drive of the game, you run on the first play of the drive just to make sure you get something on first down. But it can't be 10 out of 12. Okay? And none of those 10 runs netted you anything of consequence. So when it comes to being smart, when it comes to being shrewd and clever on the offensive side of the ball. By the way, you know who was shrewd and clever for Indiana a couple years ago? Kalen DeBoer. And you know what Kalen DeBoer is doing right now at Fresno State? Go, you know who's ranked in the top 25 right now? Not Indiana, Fresno State, led by Kalen DeBoer, who has put Jake Haener, his quarterback, in positions to succeed all season to this point. They almost went to Oregon and won in week 1. They did go to UCLA and win in week 3. That's an example of a coach. Jake Haener right now is absolutely dominating as far as the metrics are concerned for FBS level quarterbacks. And he's faced some really tough competition like Indiana has. And again, I'm not pointing my finger at one person here, but there are things you can do, but we also aren't going to be a podcast that just complains about problems. There are solutions here as far as doing what you can to give Michael Penix Jr. a little bit of time, as far as doing what you can to help Michael Penix Jr. out as far as first down and second down play calls. And Matt, you mentioned Ty Freifogel. Can we send out an all points bulletin, an APB, SOS, Ty Freifogel? What's going on? I mean, I understand that it's hard to replicate your success from last season, but through 3 games, 11 catches for 126 yards. And then you consider that on Saturday, he had 1 catch for 13 yards on 7 targets, maybe 1 or 2 of which were out of his range. That can't happen.
No.
Look, if you're under the radar and you emerge as a wide receiver, Ty Freifogel's done everything. He said all the right things as far as embracing the challenge for the 2021 season. And we haven't seen any of that. Now, the good news for Indiana is that Western Kentucky's secondary ain't Iowa's, it ain't Cincinnati's, it ain't Iowa State's, it ain't the Cincinnati Bengals. Western Kentucky's secondary is poor, okay? And it's going to be a chance for Michael Penix Jr. and Ty Freifogel and DJ Matthews and Peyton Hendershot and Stephen Carr and Tim Baldwin and David Ellis and Miles Marshall in this passing offense to really get some of those numbers back up to where you want to see them. So we're going to talk about Western Kentucky here in just a minute and maybe tie some loose ends as far as Cincinnati is concerned. But first, it's time for Who Won the Week this past week in IU sports. We're going to tip our cap to men's golfer Drew Salyers, who won Big Ten Golfer of the Week for the second time in 3 weeks. He shot 1 under at the very competitive Fighting Illini Invitational. And after Indiana's performance in Champaign, the Hoosiers are now ranked number 18 in the country in the latest Golf Week poll, which is the highest ranking among all Big Ten teams currently. So they're off to a great start as far as their season is concerned. I also wanted to give a shout out here. I don't know really who won the week, but Assembly Call and Jared Morris, their podcast host, had a wonderful interview with Rob Finnessy. Now with the new NIL day and age, you can get content from current players on the current team. Rob Finnessy, I thought, did really well. I actually think Rob Finnessy is the one who won the week as far as this exchange is concerned, because I got a lot of insight and I got a real nice view behind the scenes into Rob Finnessy's mindset as far as what happened last season, what happened over the last few years, and what to expect going forward here in the Mike Woodson era. I thought Finnessy handled himself really well. I thought Jared asked all the really important questions over the course of that hour plus. So make sure you head over and give that a listen. A very, very worthwhile hour and change you can spend listening to some of Rob Finnessy's comments as far as Indiana basketball is concerned. If you'd like to subscribe to our podcast for free, all you have to do is search for the Hoosier Sound wherever you listen to podcasts. Stay up to date with all of our information by following us on Twitter at Indiana HQ and at the Hoosier Sound. And this part is important. If you enjoy our show, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. That's important. Tell a friend, share our links. Your support really helps us grow this podcast and reach more passionate IU fans such as yourself. Matt, real quick, DJ Matthews was by far Indiana's best offensive player on Saturday.
Yes.
How did he look to you in person, seeing him run routes on the field? A much better performance than he had in week 1 against Iowa. 5 catches, 120 yards. He tacked on 28 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown. Clearly, he's someone that has to factor into this going forward, especially if Ty Freifogel isn't the receiver that we all thought he'd be this season.
Yeah, I think Matthews has the athleticism that can kind of propel him to being even wide receiver 1 of this group, which is crazy to think going into the season how highly we thought of Ty Freifogel and how badly he's played. And then he runs weird routes. It's a very, very weird because
what do you mean
by that? He's a slot receiver, right? And so he'll come out of the slot, but he finds like pockets. It's very strange where he'll slip in and out. He's like a snake. He just slips in and out of coverage, and then all of a sudden, like his guy just loses track of him, just because he's just quick on a dime, switches the route from maybe it was a 15-yard out. And all of a sudden he's like, wait, this ain't gonna work. This guy is right on my butt. I'll give him a little bit of a shake, and then I'm gonna turn up field, make it a post. And all of a sudden Penix is like, oh, he's open. And the other guys, the defender's on the floor, like, wait, he's supposed to go right here, and he went up. So that's the little kind of things that he does in the field, the little improvisations he can do. Really create opportunities for his offense. Now, at the same time, it also can take him completely out of the play. I know I was watching on that last play that Penix throws a pick, and he throws it across his body. Matthews trying to do too much on one side of the field, and so Penix doesn't have an outlet, and he's like kind of looking over in that area, and he's completely covered by like 3 dudes, and he's trying to get free, but he cannot do that. And so Penix has to throw across his body in, breaking rule number 1 for a quarterback, which is just never throw it across your body into the middle of the field. But here we are.
Super start to the season for DJ Matthews, the guy we called out during our preseason previews as the receiver you need to watch for Indiana football this year. I also want to toot my own horn. I said Peyton Hendershot was going to score, and he scored. Great game for Hendershot. I think he's really had a strong start to this 2021 season as well, and I think he's going to factor in to Indiana's next few games especially. So overall, I like what I'm seeing here. Real quick, Matt, I want to ask you this question, and then we're going to dive into Western Kentucky. Right, Indiana's 1-2. Okay, 2 losses have come to top 8 teams in the country, and the Cincinnati one is one that you really regret after the red zone mistakes and the turnovers and the targeting ejection and all that nonsense. I'm going to say Indiana loses at Penn State, at Michigan, home Ohio State. I know Ohio State's a little vulnerable right now, but they still have so much talent. If Indiana finishes the season with wins against Michigan State, Maryland, Minnesota, Rutgers, Purdue, and then wins a bowl game, 8-5, is that a successful season, or are you saying this? Nah, I don't like any
of it. That's a bit of a nuanced question. I would say any season is slightly successful if you beat Purdue. Any season is slightly successful if you beat Purdue. Like, beating your rivals is extremely important in the sport. It's what makes college sports so much fun. It's part of why I hate watching college basketball right now. So beating Purdue obviously makes the season slightly successful. Now, only slightly does that make it slightly successful. I would lean towards saying no if we end 8-5 because of the way the expectations we had going into the season.
No.
I think we need to beat one of the 3 remaining.
One of the powerhouses
In the East. Because, again, this is about Indiana vying for a spot among the Michigan States, Iowas of the world. Like, we need to make that a game. we needed to make it a much closer game at Iowa. We made it a close game. Didn't end up looking like a close game, but we made it. We actually should have won against Cincinnati. Let's be honest. That game is a win. They have a kickoff return. Penix throws 3 picks and the targeting call, and it still was only a 14-point game. Like that game, if I told all those things that happened before the game, I would have thought we lost 34-6 like at Iowa. Yeah. But we probably should have won that game. And I know Western Kentucky's coach agrees with me because he said that in the press conference.
He really did. It was hilarious. Yeah. Tyson Helton, we're going to talk about him in a second. He explicitly said Indiana should have won that game. Made some mistakes, but they were the dominant team or something like that. I can pull the quote in a minute, but dominant team. Cincinnati's great. Indiana should have won it. They're going to come in here mad. And I was like, wow, I appreciate that transparency from the Hilltoppers head coach.
Yeah, and he's a smart coach. That's a sign of a good – he understands what is going on. He understands what the mental of the other team is going to be, knowing how the previous game went. Which is something that a lot of head coaches lack. One of which ends up rhyming with Oregon. No, that's Orgeron. That was a shot at LSU because he's gonna get fired this weekend. Anyway, that's
no. Oh man.
Can you imagine winning a national championship and then getting fired 2 years later? That's gonna be just a sad.
USC already canned their coach, and it's just like, oh God, it's just there's a lot of look. I know Alabama and Ohio State and Clemson, they all grab the headlines. Yeah, Notre Dame, I'll put them in there, Georgia, Oklahoma, they grab the headlines. But, man, it is really tough. Outside of really the top sort of, metaphorically the 1%, but really like the top 7, 8 Power 5 programs in the country to win 7, 8 games consistently. And that's why I think 8-5 is still good for Indiana. I think 8-5 is fine.
I think it's good.
Yeah, and especially if, even if those losses happen to Penn State, Michigan, and Ohio State, and play competitively and you're in the game, maybe they just have a little bit more in the tank than you do. I don't want to see losses like Indiana had to Iowa, but if you're talking about 1-score games or 2-score games, you're riding until the end. I think 8-5 is great, and especially if you win that bowl game at the end of the season and you have that bucket in your grasp. And also, by the way, 8-5 means you also beat a Michigan State team that is currently number 20, but I would be stunned. I mean, sorry to jinx this for all of you Michigan State fans out there. I would be stunned if Michigan State is not 6-0 and a top 15, 16 team when they come to Bloomington October 16th for Indiana's next home game. By the way, Indiana doesn't play a home game until they play Michigan State. Indiana will be coming off a bye week. Indiana's got Western Kentucky this week, Penn State next week, bye week, and then Michigan State. And when Michigan State comes to town, I think they're going to be 6-0. And that's crazy to think about. But that would include a win over Michigan State. And I think when I look at 8-5 being a good year, yeah, I'll take it. I even think 7-6 with a loss to Michigan State instead of a win, but a win over Purdue, win the bowl game. I even think that's a successful year at Indiana. I asked that in our weekly podcast poll question to all of you who follow us at the Hoosier Sound. If Indiana goes 8-5 this season with 3 more losses to Penn State, Ohio State, and Michigan, but you beat Purdue, you beat Michigan State, and you win a bowl game, is that a successful season? 89% of you said yes. So just when you think Hoosier Nation's getting a little testy about this IU football program, you can see where the expectations are here. 8-5, bowl win, 89% of you say yes. Over 200 votes had been cast in about an hour. This poll will be up through about kickoff for the Western Kentucky game. So get your votes in. By the way, what this does mean is that the game we're going to talk about in a sec, the Western Kentucky game, is must win, and you got to have style points. That's what I'm looking for. We're going to talk about that in a sec. I just wanted to mention a couple of these comments. How about Richie Carter, who responded to our poll question and said 8-5 is a successful season no matter who the wins and the losses are by. In all honesty, 7-5 is a successful season. Of course, then Indiana will get to a bowl game and see what happens there. Mike Harkness said we have to worry about the games ahead, but yeah, very successful. Jackson Pittner replied, and he said winning a bowl game is the next step for this program. In his opinion, it just gives you so much momentum going into the next season. So that's the vibe around Hoosier Nation right now. I'm excited to see where things go as far as Indiana football is concerned, because I really do think this game Saturday in a little bit over 24 hours, and I'll be there and Jevin will be there to cover it for Indiana HQ. This game against Western Kentucky's got to be the one where I see Indiana look like one of these teams that have 8-win aspirations. But first, it's time for our social media shout out. And I wanted to tip my cap to Indiana quarterback Michael Penix Jr., who took to Instagram and posted a very determined, sort of resolved message on his Instagram account. You can follow him on Instagram at MP9. That's Michael Penix, MP9. It was a very just confident message. It's quoting a song lyric. I've lost, won, failed, cried, laughed, loved, but never folded. And his caption was, and never will. So expect Michael Penix Jr. to come out with some motivation, with some fire in this game on Saturday against Western Kentucky. Let's dive right into the preview, Matt. Western Kentucky is a 1-1 squad. They're unranked, coming off a bye week. They started their season with a win over Tennessee Martin by a score of 59-21, and then a week 2 loss at Army 38-35. They have no injuries of note. I thought it was kind of interesting that they do play Michigan State a week from Saturday, October 2nd in East Lansing. So you'll see a common opponent between Indiana and Michigan State. Of course, the location of the game will be different for those two matchups. The game kicks off at 8 p.m. Eastern on Saturday. CBS Sports Network is where you will be tuned into. Indiana is a 9-point favorite. The over-under 63. So the odds makers predict something like a 30 score in favor of the Hoosiers. It is at a football field that has the worst name in FBS. Houchins Industries LT Smith Stadium in Bowling Green, Kentucky. I have seen it shortened to Houchins Smith Stadium, and if that's what they do informally, that's great. The formal name of it is Houchins Industries LT Smith Stadium, which makes me want to throw up in my mouth. The game time temperature is supposed to be 66 degrees and clear at kickoff, down to a temp in the high 50s as the game goes on. It's supposed to be a blackout at Western Kentucky. Obviously, the Conference USA team is going to be pumped to have a Big Ten team in their house. It's the third Power 5 opponent that Western Kentucky has ever hosted. Indiana had traveled to Bowling Green, Kentucky before. Vanderbilt also went to Western Kentucky too. The Hilltoppers are 0-8 all time against current Big Ten teams. So yeah, hope you don't make history as far as that's concerned. It's a pass-heavy offense led by quarterback Bailey Zappi, and that's how you pronounce it, Zappi. He threw for over 10,000 yards in his career at Houston Baptist, and he's transferred over to Western Kentucky to play for third-year coach Tyson Helton. Zappi's got some eye-popping numbers, Matt, and he's going to throw it to a 5'9" wide receiver in Jarrett Stearns, who he played with at Houston Baptist.
Yep.
The Hilltoppers have some crazy pass game numbers, but we know Indiana's got a good secondary. Break down that matchup a little bit for us here, as Zappi's going to try to throw for 500 yards and set school records against this Hoosier defense.
Yes. He won't be able to do that because, again, Western Kentucky hasn't played anybody up to the caliber
that's true
of IU's defense, and especially IU's secondary. So the good news is that their strength is also matched up against our strength. Outside of their passing game, they don't really have much. They don't really run the ball all that well. Now, of course, us being the biggest game that they have had on their schedule up until now, they might be saving some stuff. So we might have to wait and see. But from what we have seen on tape so far, really it is about stopping their quarterback from throwing the ball, which comes to something that hasn't happened all that much this year, and that's our defensive line getting pressure without needing to rush linebackers. We're going to need all the coverage we can get on the back end. These wide receivers are good. They have a really good scheme. They like to get players out in space. It's kind of like a shoot 'em up kind of offense. Where they try to get people into space and try to create plays after the catch. And they play it really well. It's a very well-run system that Western Kentucky has. But IU can completely negate it if they can just get pressure on the quarterback naturally without having to get rid of some of the protection, or they get pressure really fast. There's one of two ways to counter this kind of offense, and that's get the ball out of the quarterback's hands extremely quickly, or if he has time to throw, make sure he's throwing under complete and utter duress. If he's doing that, you're going to cause a lot of problems. He's going to force the quarterback into making mistakes, something that IU fans are very familiar with quarterback play as of recently. And it's going to create an atmosphere in that stadium that's going to be kind of reminiscent to what we had on Saturday at IU Stadium in the second half, which is a little bit of like, what is going on? Yeah. And so, like, if IU wants to win this game, it's going to be one in the trenches with our hopefully superior talent that we have. Now that has yet to have been seen this year outside of the Idaho game, and even in the Idaho game, our offensive line looked like Dookie. So we shall see what this game has in store for us on Saturday.
Yeah, and the thing with Western Kentucky, I mean, they're, you could be up 14 or down 14, and they're going to be throwing the ball no matter what. Okay, they have no confidence in their run game, and regardless of confidence, the production hasn't been there. So it's going to be a team that relies on their quarterback Zappe, who is getting NFL draft consideration, a guy who's completed 74% of his passes for 859 yards with 10 touchdowns and 2 picks in just 2 games. Western Kentucky is coming off a bye week, and Zappe is 20th in the country in passing yards.
Yeah.
And they've only played 2 games. There are guys he's had more passing yards than guys that played 3 or 4 games. So watch out as far as this Western Kentucky pass game is concerned. And why this is especially important is that for defensive coordinator Charlton Warren and for a defensive backs coach Brandon Shelby, you're gonna give up 1 or 2 big plays over the course of this game, but you can't let that rattle you. It's much different than Iowa or Cincinnati, where 1 or 2 big plays is a really big deal, especially if it's through the air. Here, if Western Kentucky gets 1 or 2 on you deep, you just got to move on to the next play and keep going as far as that's concerned. Defensively, Western Kentucky has a lot of question marks. Their best players are their defensive ends, D'Angelo Malone and Juwan Jones. D'Angelo Malone was preseason 2021 Conference USA Defensive Player of the Year, and he was the 2019 postseason Conference USA Defensive Player of the Year. A guy with 25 career sacks. He wears number 10, so make sure you keep an eye out for him. Of course, where Western Kentucky's defense can really affect Indiana is if their defensive ends can beat Caleb Jones and Luke Haggard off the edge, and then all of a sudden you've got a lot of the same problems that you had in the first 3 games this year. But overall, by the way, one other defensive player I would watch out for is Antoine Kincaid, defensive back, more than willing to get in on tackles to stop in the run game. He wears number 1, longtime starter at Western Kentucky. Definitely keep an eye out for him. But this is a game, Matt, where Indiana, to me, has more than enough talent to put up 45 points at 500 total yards and get this offense back on track. The defense is going to give some stuff up, but overall, I have very little concern about Indiana's defense doing enough to win this game. Offensively, I want to see fireworks. I want to see what you saw last year against Michigan. I want to see what you saw last year in some of those games, especially against Michigan State in the first half or against Rutgers when things were cooking. I want to see that type of performance. Tell me that I'm not ridiculous here, because Indiana's offense here should be able to put up a crooked number. Obviously, the odds makers have Indiana projected for 36 points right now.
Yeah, get the 36 points. If this team doesn't get the 36 points, like if we get outscored by Army put up 38 on this Western Kentucky team. If we get outscored by Army, there's going to be some questions.
They gave up 21 to Tennessee Martin.
Yeah,
Martin.
Some serious questions, Nithin, because Army runs the triple option, and they barely passed the ball, and they put up 38. They had enough time to put up 38. running the triple option. They run the ball every play. There's a running clock when they're on offense. Are you kidding me?
They ran for 339 yards against Western Kentucky. By the way, Tennessee Martin ran for 201 and threw for 195 against Western Kentucky. So all across the board, you're not facing an NFL secondary anymore. Indiana's done that 2 out of the first 3 games.
There are some high school secondaries that are better than Western Kentucky's. All right.
So, I mean, all I'm saying is this is the get right game for Indiana, because from here on out, it only gets tougher. Okay. Yeah. Rutgers isn't bad. Maryland's not bad.
Nobody in the Big Ten.
Purdue's not bad.
Nobody in the Big Ten.
Illinois is bad, but they're not on your schedule. So
Big Ten West, baby. Nebraska, Illinois. It's definitely even, I think.
So it's such a joke of a conference. I'm going to talk about Wisconsin in a second. I'm going to talk about it. It's a joke of a division over in the West, but the East is tough. And Indiana's crossover games, Minnesota. Hey, Gophers 130 over the weekend. Iowa, we saw how that went. And Purdue hung tight in there against Notre Dame. Purdue's knocked off Oregon State already. So as far as I'm concerned, Indiana, this is the get right game, because from here on out, it gets a lot tougher. I told you guys about 8-5. Well, in order to get to 8-5, you've got to win this game. And I want to see style points, because from a bird's eye view up in the press box at Memorial Stadium on Saturday, I saw an Indiana team that was playing fast, that was playing physical. The receivers are running, fidgety, not fidgety, that's not the right word, but sharp routes with twists and turns and cuts involved. Stephen Carr looks like a good running back who's maybe 1 or 2 carries away from bursting a big one. Peyton Hendershot looks like an NFL tight end. DJ Matthews has come. Indiana, to me, looks like, eye test, like a good team.
Yeah.
But if they're in their heads after the way the first 3 games went, and if they don't have the same confidence and the same buy-in that they had at the start of the season, and I'm not saying that's a problem, but I'm just saying if that's the case, and Indiana stumbles on Saturday, then we have a full-on crisis. But right now, I still see this team as one that can really make a splash still in Big Ten play. So, Matt, as you look at these 2 teams, give me a prediction. Who do you think wins, and by how much? Once again, Indiana's a 9-point favorite going into this contest on Saturday night.
48-24 IU.
Ooh, okay. So you're feeling pretty confident about this.
I think the defense scores 2 touchdowns.
That would be pretty impressive, especially if it comes off of zappy interceptions. He has 1 through 2 games, and we'll see. We'll see how that works. But
Army and Tennessee Martin.
And I will say, having watched the one against Army was a really bad one. Okay,
Yeah.
It is one of those really, really rough picks that he threw. So, to make it clear, he is definitely facing a greater degree of difficulty. And Indiana made life for Desmond Ridder quite difficult on Saturday. By the way, Desmond Ridder, Ahmad Gardner, the Cincinnati corner, as well as their defensive end, Myjai Sanders, are all currently graded as top 60 players for the 2022 NFL draft. Indiana faced, for all intents and purposes, a Big Ten team last week, and you saw how all that played out. I've got Indiana winning this one too. I'm a little bit, I want to see the offense explode, but I'm not quite ready to go there for a prediction. I'm going to say 34-23 Indiana. I think they're going to do some good things. I think they're going to leave some points on the table though. But they're going to get a win. I think it's going to be relatively comfortable. Don't be surprised if Western Kentucky jumps out to a lead, but I expect Indiana to, over the course of 60 minutes, wrestle control of the game and then put the ball in the end zone. 3 red zones. I don't know if I've ever seen that before, where 3 drives go inside the 10-yard line and come away with 0 points. That was absolutely mind-boggling. But that's how Matt and I see this Indiana-Western Kentucky game playing out. By the way, the Hilltoppers head coach Tyson Helton in his 3rd year, younger brother of Clay Helton, offensive mind, former quarterback at the University of Houston. Kind of interesting to see that connection to probably the coach that's been in the headlines the most as far as the 2021 season is concerned. So just a fun little twist there. A first-year offensive coordinator, young coordinators on both sides of the ball. 3rd-year defensive coordinator at Western Kentucky. So definitely curious to see how that goes. But once again, they're stars. Bailey Zappi, their quarterback, Jarrett Stearns, their receiver, D'Angelo Malone, and Juwan Jones coming off the edge as far as defensive ends concerned. should be a fun game to watch. The news update you have to be ready for is the availability of Indiana safety Devon Matthews in the warm-ups going into Saturday's game. Make sure you're plugged into our Twitter account at Indiana HQ and at the Hoosier Sound, and make sure you follow, because I'll be there and Jevin will be there covering pregame warm-ups. If Devon Matthews is out and dressed and ready to play, Indiana should really win this game comfortably, but his absence would be bigger than, say, it would be bigger than if Michael Penix Jr. couldn't play on Saturday. So Devon Matthews' availability on Saturday, make sure you're plugged into Indiana HQ. And make sure you follow us on Twitter. Make sure you have those alerts ready to go, because once we see whether or not Matthews is dressed or not for Saturday's game, we will get that information out as soon as we can. He is going to be incredibly important to limit that Hilltopper passing game. Matt, let's talk about some Big Ten picks of the week. We always like to wrap up our show by looking at all the other games taking place in the Big Ten. Lots of interesting contests. We've got multiple conference matchups. We've got some interesting non-conference games as well. Matt, give me a pick against the spread. Give me an upset special here as we head into week 4 of college football.
Last week I picked against Notre Dame. Purdue actually kept it close, and then Notre Dame pulled away at the end, so that was wrong. And I will not pick against Notre Dame again because it's Wisconsin. My picks for this week against the spread are Iowa to cover minus 23 against Colorado State. We saw what they did to us at home. I don't see Colorado State scoring a single damn point in this game.
They used to be a good program, Colorado State. They've really come across.
Well, they lost their head coach to Florida, who then went and couldn't recruit anybody on any side of the ball. And so they got rid of him, and then they haven't the same since.
Anyway.
And then oh my God, what is that Michigan State line? Anyways, that's besides the point. Yeah. And then you look at
upset special. Any upset special that stick out to you?
Upset special this week has to be, I like Notre Dame to upset Wisconsin. It's the opposite. It's the inverse of what I did last week. They can't do me wrong this time. Mostly because I don't see any other upsets on here. It's not like Akron is going to pull an upset. They're minus 48 to Ohio State. By the way, how Ohio State can be favored by 48 points by Vegas comfortably is absurd to me. 48,
and they're gonna start a backup quarterback in that game. CJ Stroud is not gonna be starting for the Buckeyes on Saturday night, but that is neither here nor there. My spread pick's going to be Rutgers covering 20 at Michigan. I just think 20 is a lot. Michigan's a good team.
20 is a lot.
They've improved. They've gotten better. I think they're deservedly a top 25 team right now. I just think 20 is too much. Rutgers isn't a doormat team anymore. They weren't last year when they were right there with Michigan until the end of the game. This year, I know the big house is going to be rocking and rolling. But Rutgers has already went to Syracuse and won. I think Rutgers will keep it to within 20 against Michigan.
Syracuse, though. Syracuse football is so bad. ACC football is so bad outside of Notre Dame and Clemson. Let's be honest here.
Yeah, and no, it's rough. And while I'm really curious about Illinois, Purdue, and Nebraska, Michigan State, I can't go that far. I can't go so far as to pick upsets in those contests. So I'm also going to take Notre Dame. I think Notre Dame's going to beat Wisconsin. That game's at Soldier Field, neutral site, and it's not going to be neutral because it's going to be a majority Notre Dame crowd at Soldier Field on Saturday. I think the Fighting Irish are going to be feeling pretty good about themselves. Honestly, I didn't think they were going to win by 2 scores against Purdue, and they did. And in Wisconsin, they're coming off a bye, but I haven't liked what I've seen from Wisconsin at all through 2 games. I thought their first game, especially against Penn State, was really rough, and against Eastern Michigan. I know they won comfortably, but I didn't see enough out of Graham Mertz to think that he's going to find gaps in this Notre Dame secondary. So I've also got Notre Dame pulling off the upset. Important clarification, Indiana HQ and the Hoosier Sound are not liable for any wagering losses obtained by the followers. However, if you want to send us some winnings, that is all up to you. Yeah, Matt, what's up?
How is Michigan State only favored by 5 at home against Nebraska?
That's such a weird. First of all, it's going to be a really weird game in general. I'm a little bummed that I'm going to be covering this Indiana Western Kentucky game while it's going on. I'm going to maybe try to peek and catch a glance here of the score. Of course, the Indiana game's not going to start until at least the first quarter. That Nebraska-Michigan State game is done. Nebraska played well at Oklahoma. They kept it close. The close, I don't know how much that means.
Close only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades. Let's be honest.
So we'll see. We'll see what happens. Should be an interesting game. Of course, I mentioned earlier, I thought Michigan State was going to go 6-0, knocking off Nebraska, Western Kentucky, as well as Rutgers before coming to Bloomington. So, Matt, any final thoughts as we wind down here on this Friday night? Indiana, Western Kentucky, Saturday night. The Hoosiers are supposed to win. I want to see fireworks. I want to see style points. Any closing thoughts as far as episode 218 of the Hoosier Sound?
Well, closing thoughts on football. Please win. Please, God. Please.
Please. It's too far away from basketball season.
Please. Well, actually, that was the second thing I was going to bring up, which is that it's not actually that far away because Hoosier Hysteria is
true
next weekend. So that's great. So very excited about that. I will be going to Hoosier Hysteria. So we'll have that covered. And yeah, it's going to be a good time. But I'm very excited for that.
And way to go with the collaboration between men's basketball and football programs at Indiana to make sure those two events didn't overlap. The Indiana-Penn State game time came out. They said it was a primetime game in Happy Valley on October 2nd.
By the way, oh my God. I don't want to know what's going to happen to us in that football game.
It's going to make the upset win even better, Matt. I honestly, I would expect that game to be something like a 10 to 12 point favored for Penn State, and I could see Indiana keeping it close, but we'll save that stuff for next week, man.
Yeah, copium.
I want to see this Indiana team hit somebody, and I want to see this Indiana football team blow someone out, and it's not Idaho. Like, Western Kentucky's a good group of 5 program that doesn't have the firepower that Indiana has. I want to see the Hoosiers kick some butt on Saturday. I want to see them take those 2 losses that they had to top 8 teams in the country and play fast and play physical and play explosive against Western Kentucky and come away with a comfortable win. There's a lot this team can still accomplish this year. Micah McFadden said it during his press conference, and you can get the feeling that the players believe that as well, but you've got to show it on the field, because I think fan morale is excessively low right now for what you've seen through 3 games. But if Indiana loses Saturday, then all bets are off. But I am looking forward to seeing in person this Indiana offense especially light it up. I want to see Madden type numbers. I want to see Penix throw for, more touchdowns than he has incompletions. I want to see 100-yard receiving days for Freifogel or DJ Matthews or Peyton Hendershot. I want to see 100-yard rushing days for Stephen Carter, Tim Baldwin. That's the kind of stuff I'm looking forward to seeing. Yeah. So Indiana, go out there and take care of business. Get this thing back on track. And then you've got a fascinating Big Ten stretch coming up the rest of the way. And then we can start having some fun. But this Saturday, you have got to not only win, but show something against the Hilltoppers. So that's what I'm looking forward to seeing. That about wraps it up for our 218th show of the Hoosier Sound. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your support. Thank you to our live audience. You're all beautiful people. To hear more episodes like the one you heard today, be sure to follow us at Indiana HQ to make sure you don't miss any in the future. You can also go to our website, indianahq.com, to find it all in one place. But as always, thank you for listening, Hoosier Nation.